Thank you, Diane. Okay, so as I said, this is probably review for most of you, for all of you. The whole point of it is simply just to allow everyone to have the chance to hear these halachos considerations together as a group. And if anybody has any questions, to discuss them. If you would prefer not to ask a question in public and you want to ask a question privately, so then please feel free to ask that question to either me or to Rabbi Lichter privately, offline. We'll be more than glad to discuss it with you. Not rocket science here. I'm sure you've all been doing this for a long time, but just to review some of the laws. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you all on, I'm going to mute you all. You can, of course, unmute yourselves if you have a question, but this way we don't have to worry about any background noise that might come through. So basically what I want to review over the next few minutes is how does one heat up food for Shabbos lunch. So we're going to divide that food for Shabbos lunch up into two categories, liquid or solid. And actually, there's probably a combination of those two categories, but let's first deal with the main two categories, liquid and solid. A liquid, such as a soup or a gravy or something like that, cannot be heated up for Shabbos lunch. Can't be heated up for Shabbos lunch. There's no way to take that liquid from cold to hot that you would want to serve it at Shabbos lunch. So if it's a liquid, it can't be reheated from cold. Now, again, this is a particular Ashkenazic custom. And if you're Sephardic, you might be accustomed to doing that. But since we're following the minhag of the shul, we're going to go with the Ashkenazic tradition, and a soup or a gravy or something like that cannot be heated from cold to hot on Shabbos. What would I do if I wanted to serve, let's say, soup at lunch? So really the only way to serve soup at lunch is to keep it hot the entire from before Shabbos until lunch. Now, how is it possible to keep soup hot from before Shabbos until lunch? So the only way that I really know of to successfully do that is by using a crock pot. That if you filled a crock pot with soup before Shabbos and you then left that crock pot on until lunch, so you could then take that crock pot out of its cooker at Shabbos lunchtime, and you could have hot soup to serve at lunch. But other than that, there's really no other way that I'm familiar with that's halachically acceptable and practical in order to heat up either soup or gravy, anything which is defined as liquid. The other category is solid food. And solid food can be warmed up on Shabbos. And what we're going to do is focus on how to warm up that food on Shabbos, so that you can prepare your food before Shabbos. Maybe you have it for dinner. Maybe you just put it in the refrigerator. But whatever it is, Shabbos morning, you take it out of the refrigerator. How do you then warm up that food to serve to the guests who are coming to you for Shabbos 360? And we're going to focus on all of that. But there is a third category before we get to that, and that is sometimes if you make something, it might have liquid in the pan with it. So let's say that you had a chicken and you cooked the chicken with liquid, and you left it in your foil pan, and now you put your foil pan in the refrigerator, and it's Shabbos morning, and you want to heat up the chicken, But in the process of heating up the chicken, what are you going to be doing? You're going to be heating up the liquid if you heat up the entire pan. So what you literally need to do is take the chicken out of that pan, put it into another pan, and just heat up the dry chicken that way. You can't heat it up with that chicken gravy. Now, you don't have to scrape everything off of the chicken. So for instance, when you pick up a piece of chicken from this pot, there might be some gravy or something that's solidified. So you shake off whatever you can. And then if a little bit is warmed up along with the chicken, we're fine with that. We just don't heat up a pan full of gravy or liquid along with the solid chicken, which is in it. So let's talk about how we heat up cold, solid food from the refrigerator for Shabbos lunch. So one of the ways of doing that is through the use of a blech. And there are a couple of considerations that need to be in place in order to do this. Number one, any food that you heat up on Shabbos morning, let's say for Shabbos lunch, needs to be fully cooked before Shabbos begins. You can't have something which is not fully cooked, and by heating it up on Shabbos, you are now making it fully cooked. The food needs to be fully cooked before Shabbos. The heat source that you are using to warm up this food needs to be covered. And what are the possible heat sources that you could be using to warm up this food? So you could be using a blech. A blech, as you know, is a metal sheet that covers either one burner or multiple burners on your stovetop. And by having this metal sheet on top of your fire on your stovetop, and the fire, of course, needs to be left on from before Shabbos, obviously at a very low temperature, but you leave it on at a very low temperature from before Shabbos, and that is considered a covered fire. If you can take aluminum foil and cover the controls of the stovetop, that's preferable. That's even a better way to do it. But as long as the fire is covered, that's acceptable. So you could take your cold food out of the refrigerator and use the blech to warm it up. But you can't just put the cold food on top of the blech. Why not? Because in halacha, that is considered giving off the appearance of cooking something. Someone could walk in and they would see a piece of chicken in a pan on the blech, and they could say that that's the way you are actually cooking something on Shabbos. So to avoid that appearance of cooking, you have two options. Option number one is if you have other food on the blech. Let's say that you have left on the blech from the night before a pot of something. You have a big pot. Maybe you're cooking your cholent. Maybe you have your cholent on the blech or something like that. You have a pot on the blech. So you could put your chicken, the pan of chicken, on top of that pot. Because anybody walking in would see that and say, nobody cooks that way. Nobody cooks chicken on top of another pot or anything like that. So therefore, you've avoided the problem that it appears as if you're cooking. For most of us, that's not practical because most of us are not leaving a pot of anything on the blech all Friday night, to Shabbos day. Most of us are cleaning off the blech. There's nothing on the blech Friday night when we go to sleep. So Shabbos morning, I get up and now I want to heat up this pan of chicken or this pan of meat or whatever it is. How do I do it? So I take a cookie sheet or an aluminum pan. I turn it upside down and put it on the blech. And then I put my pan of chicken or my pan of meat on top of that that overturned cookie sheet or aluminum pan or something like that. I recommend generally using a shallow aluminum pan because it keeps the food closer to the heat. It heats up a little bit better. Not a deep aluminum pan, a shallow aluminum pan. Invert the aluminum pan so now it's upside down. And put your tray of chicken or your tray of meat on top of that aluminum pan, and it will heat up from the heat of the fire on the blech. So if you are using a blech, that is the way in which to warm up food on Shabbos. Some people, though, don't use a blech. They're not comfortable leaving a fire burning the entire night, so they don't use a blech. Maybe people will use an electric hot tray. Right? If you're using an electric hot tray, you have an electric hot tray plugged in. In Israel, they're called platas. You have a plata plugged in, and that stays warm the entire night. And now you are going to warm up something on that plata. So to warm up something on that plata, you need to have a covering on top of that plata. So you take a piece of aluminum foil, cut it obviously before Shabbos, put it on top of the plata, on top of the electric hot plate, and then you can take your pan of chicken or your pan of meat and you can put it on top of that. That's option number 2, is using a plata or an electric hot plate. Option number 3 is using what's called a warming drawer. Many people have warming drawers in their home. When you put in your oven, you put in a warming drawer, and a warming drawer can be used to warm up food on Shabbos. Obviously, it needs to be turned on from before Shabbos, and it needs to remain on throughout all of Shabbos. And in order to use a warming drawer, you need to do the following. You need to line the warming drawer with aluminum foil. Meaning before Shabbos, you put aluminum foil on the bottom of the warming drawer, and you put aluminum foil on the sides of the warming drawer. And then you, if possible, you take a piece of aluminum foil and cover the controls of the warming drawer. Sometimes that's not so easy to do. Sometimes it's easier to do. Again, the same thing by the blech. Ideally, the controls should be covered, but if the controls can't be covered, it's sufficient if you cover the heat source with aluminum foil. And then you could take your food from your refrigerator, your pan of chicken or your pan of meat or your pan of kugel or potatoes or vegetables, whatever it is, and you can put it in your warming drawer to heat up that way in your warming drawer. The 4th option is a warming cart. Some of you might have a warming cart. It's called a Vicron cart. It's actually sold by one of our members, one of the things that they do on the side. And it is it's sold by Nicholas and Vivian Cron. If you want to contact the Crons, I don't know if you can get it before next Shabbos, maybe you can, but it is a warming drawer, and the warming drawer essentially opens up, and it has 2 shelves, and you could put it has to be plugged in before Shabbos. You can put your food directly into this warming cart. You can put your food directly into this warming cart. The warming cart has no controls. It can't be adjusted in any way. So there's no need to cover the shelves of the warming cart. So we have the blech, we have the plata or the electric hot plate, we have the warming drawer of the oven, and we have the warming cart. What about my oven? What if I want to use my oven to heat up food on Shabbos? And the answer, unfortunately, is you cannot use your oven to heat up food on Shabbos. Even if your oven has a Shabbos mode to it, that's not for Shabbos. It's a misnomer. Shabbos mode only allows the oven to be used on Yom Tov. An oven can't be used to warm up food for Shabbos lunch, because opening up the door of that oven to put the food in and then taking right? When you open the door of the oven to put the food in, you are introducing cold air into the oven, and you are causing the thermostat of the oven to kick on. And that's the normal way in which we cook something, and therefore one can't do it that way. One can't warm up food using the oven. If 360 were Friday night as opposed to Shabbos lunch, and Diane might change that for next year, who knows? But if 360 were Friday night, you could put food into your oven before Shabbos, and you could then use your oven then to warm food up for Friday night. If, as long as it's in before Shabbos, you can open your oven and take it out, but you have to take out everything. But for Shabbos lunch, an oven can't be used to warm up the food. Okay, so those are the 4 methods where you can warm up dry or mostly dry food from your refrigerator to be able to serve it at lunch. What about cholent? What do we do with cholent? So cholent is generally cooked in a crock pot. And the cholent is put up before Shabbos. It needs to be put up with enough time before Shabbos so that it is at least a third of the way cooked before Shabbos begins. So certainly an hour, 2 hours before Shabbos, put your cholent up and let your cholent cook all of Shabbos. And then you can simply take it out of the crock pot, take the pot, the crock, out of the cooking element, and you can serve that for Shabbos. If anybody makes cholent in a pot and they want to have some more direction, I ask them to reach out to either me or Rabbi Lichter separately, and we can discuss that with you. A couple of ancillary points. Number 1, if you have cholent in a pot, in order to serve that cholent, let's say you have a crock pot, and the crock pot that you should be using on Shabbos should have a removable crock. The crock is actually the ceramic thing in which the cholent sits. That should be removable from the cooking element, which is a metal heating element. The crock fits into that metal heating element. So that's the kind of crock pot that you should be using for Shabbos. And if you want to serve that cholent for Shabbos lunch, or actually any time on Shabbos, you can't simply remove the lid while the cholent is inside the heating element, while the crock is inside the heating element, and spoon out the cholent from that crock. You have to literally lift the crock with its lid out of the heating element, put it down on a safe place, at which point you can then open the lid and serve it. And the reason why you can't serve while it's in its cooking element is because the process of serving, the stirring process of serving, ultimately winds up aiding the cooking process of the cholent. So that applies, by the way, not just to cholent Shabbos lunch or cholent Friday night. If you're having it, it also applies to soup Friday night. A lot of people take soup Friday night, they warm it up before Shabbos, and they leave it on the blech. And when it comes time for you to serve that soup on Friday night, you can't simply take the lid off of the pot, put your ladle in, take it from there and put it into a soup bowl. You have to move the pot of soup off of the blech, and then you can uncover it and serve it from there. So that's an ancillary point that's important to know regarding serving food while it's in its cooking element or warming element. The final 2 things that I'd like to cover have to do with making tea on Shabbos and making coffee on Shabbos. Because after all, you have company and you might want to serve tea or coffee to your company at the end of the meal. So how do you properly make tea on Shabbos? There are 2 options for making tea on Shabbos. One option is to use a tea bag. And if you are going to use a tea bag, Annie, I'll come to that question in just a second. And by the way, Annie reminds me, if any of you have any questions, I'm going to open up the floor, unmute you all in a minute. But if you have any questions while you're thinking about it and you want to just throw them on the chat, please feel free to do so. So if you want to use tea bags for Shabbos because somebody gave you as a present this nice container of tea bags, and you want to put tea bags out and you want to let your guests choose from their tea bags. So in order to use a tea bag on Shabbos, you have to make sure that the tea bag is being put into what is considered a kli shlishi. Kli shlishi, the word kli means container. Shlishi means a third level. It's a third level container. And here's how best to understand it. I'm going to tell you what we do in our home. And since we do it in our home, my wife says it's okay to do. So that's what I would recommend as well. We have a teapot, we have an urn, and we have individual teacups. So the urn is boiling the water from before Shabbos, right? It's keeping the water warm all of Shabbos. That is considered a kli rishon. That's the first level utensil because the water is being warmed up in that, kept hot in that utensil. So that's a kli rishon. We then take a teapot and we fill the teapot from the urn. The teapot is now considered a kli sheni. It is a second level utensil. It's not the utensil in which the water was warmed, but the water came from that first level utensil into that kli sheni, into that second level utensil. We then take the teapot and we go around and pour water into the cups, the individual teacups of people who want tea. That now makes their teacup a third level, right? It's removed twice from where the water was cooked. The urn is level number 1, the teapot is level number 2, and the cup is level number 3. It is permissible to put a tea bag into that level number 3 cup. That's the general way in which people serve tea on Shabbos. Okay, that's the general way. What if you don't have a teapot? Okay, there is another way of doing it. My wife says, what if you don't have a teapot? So there is another way of doing it, and that is you can, in the kitchen, literally bring out hot water to each guest already defined as a kli shlishi. How would I do that? So I would do it in the following way. Let's say I have 2 people at the table who want tea. So I'll go to my urn and I'll take a measuring cup or any other kind of cup, but we use generally a measuring cup, not because we're measuring the water. You're not supposed to measure on Shabbos, but just because it's convenient. We'll fill up the measuring cup with hot water from the urn. The urn is level number 1. The measuring cup is level number 2. Then we'll pour it into the teacup. That makes the teacup level number 3. And we'll then bring the teacup filled with water out to the table and give it to the guest. So that's another way in which this can be done. And most people prefer to use tea bags, so I'll restrict it to that. What about coffee? Right? What about coffee? One other thing, and I guess this is hard to control from your guests, but maybe it's just good to know, and that is that when you use a tea bag on Shabbos, many people, when they normally use a tea bag, have the custom to sort of squeeze out the tea bag. So you're not allowed to squeeze out a tea bag on Shabbos. You can take it out of the cup of tea, but you can't squeeze it out on Shabbos. I wouldn't correct your guests if they're doing that in front of everybody else, but that's what I would suggest. Okay, the final thing about making coffee, and when it comes to making coffee, coffee doesn't have the same stringency as tea does. And because coffee is actually, if you're using instant coffee, it's actually pre-cooked. It's cooked already once. So for coffee, it's sufficient to simply fill up a cup of hot water directly from the urn, and you can put the coffee right into that second level. You don't need a third level utensil for coffee. You only need it for tea. You don't need it for coffee. And again, just a reminder that if you are serving tea bags, you should make sure that the tea bags are torn open before Shabbos, so that your guests don't have to deal with tearing open and perhaps tearing through letters on a tea bag on Shabbos. And I would say the same thing if you're offering sugar, packages of sugar or sweetener or something like that, just to take a pair of scissors and cut the top off of the sugar packs or the sweetener to do that. Okay, I'm gonna deal with the two. We have two questions on the chat. I'll deal with the two questions on the chat, and then I'll open the floor if any of you want to ask questions. So one of the questions is, once you take the cholent out of the pot, I think what you mean is once you take the crock, the ceramic pot where the cholent is cooking, once you take it out of the metal heating element, can you put it back in? And the answer is yes, as long as a number of conditions are met. Those conditions are, number one, you need to have in mind when you're taking it out that you intend to put it back. Number two, it still has to be warm when you put it back. Number three, you keep one hand on the pot, right? On this, while it's on the counter, you keep one hand on it before you put it back in. If you have if those three conditions are met, so then you can put the crock, the ceramic crock of the cholent, back into the heating element. Another question is, are you allowed to use a timer on the Vicron cart? And the answer is absolutely yes. You can set a timer so that it goes on Shabbos morning and it goes off after you've heated up your food for Shabbos. That's not a problem. Okay, I'm going to unmute everyone right now, and we'll spend a moment. You know what? I don't think I can actually unmute you. Or I can ask you to unmute. Okay, you've all been asked to unmute. You all have permission to unmute. If you want to unmute yourselves and ask any questions, I'm glad to try to answer them. Anybody?
Yeah.
Go ahead. I see Karen. Go ahead. I can't see everybody, so go ahead.
So my question is, if I want to make cholent and put it before Shabbos in the oven and leave the oven all night, is that okay?
That's okay, as long as you don't open the oven to take it out until you're ready to use it.
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
I have a chicken question. You mentioned that if you cook the chicken overnight and then the gravy solidifies, that you had to remove the chicken and put it in a second tin. What would happen if you just scraped off all of the gel?
You can do that. You can scrape it off also. That would be fine. Right, okay. But it's you have to make sure there's not a lot of gel left in the pan.
Right. Understood.
That's fine. That's fine. We're not requiring you to wipe off the chicken. Just scrape off whatever's loosely attached to it. Any other questions? Hold on, I have a question here. Ellen, go ahead. Hold on a second. I'm getting past the note here. Yes. Anybody else? Any other questions?
It's Galit. I have a question. If I'm ordering Kolbe food, because that's what I may be doing, warming up that meat or chicken, and I guess it was maybe the question Annie just asked, but if there is a little gel on the meat when I'm warming it up, do I have to try scrape that off?
If there's only a little bit of gel, in other words, the normal amount of gel, you know, when food cools off, so often there will be that gel or whatever will condense. As long as it's only a little bit, it's not something that we're concerned with. Most of it will get reabsorbed back into the meat when you warm it up.
Okay, and my other question, because my sister-in-law was talking about this, I use a warmer that's electric that I plug in, I put on a timer. And she uses a blech. Her blech gets really hot, and she always tells me that she has to put an empty foil container underneath what she's warming up.
So
And
I
I've
mentioned
never done that.
I mentioned that before you
Okay,
came
sorry, I was
on.
late, so if you don't mind just repeating.
Yeah, I mentioned that before you come on. That has nothing to do with the heat. It has to do with avoiding what's considered a normal method of cooking. In other words, somebody would come in and see it directly on the top of the stove. They might think that you're cooking it. If they see it on an inverted cookie sheet or an inverted aluminum pan, so then that's clearly an unusual way and they wouldn't think that you're cooking it. It has nothing to do with how hot it is. It just has to do with how, with the appearances. If you're using an electric hot plate, so you need to have a piece of aluminum foil
Yes.
on the top of the hot plate
I always have.
to quote cover that way you're covering the source of heat.
Okay, thank you.
Wait, hold on a second.
Using the oven, you can't open and close the oven.
I say that. Just to remind again, if you're using the oven, I think I mentioned this to Karen. If you're putting cholent in the oven before Shabbos, you can't open and close the oven. You can only open it once. Once it's open, you have to take the cholent out. You can only open it once. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so this recording will be sent out to each of you. Each of you will get a link to the recording, and feel free to review it and to ask any questions if you're not sure of something that I said. You can ask me, you can ask Rabbi Lichter, and we will also be sending out to you, along with the link, a cheat sheet of instructions for warming up food on Shabbos that contains much of what I mentioned, just as a handy reference for you. Diane, anything that we need to add?
No, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, all. Thank you all very much for joining. And we're grateful for your participation in what's going to be a really very special Shabbos at Great Neck Synagogue. Have a great night.
Thank you.